You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
It's March 2015, and Gypsy Rose Blanchard is nervous. She's meeting her long-distance boyfriend in person today for the first time, and they have a plan. They're going to accidentally bump into each other at the movies in Gypsy's hometown of Springfield, Missouri. Her mum doesn't let her go anywhere alone because she's really unwell. She has muscular dystrophy, leukemia, and epilepsy, as well as a bunch of other things. And Dee Dee is super protective. But Gypsy's ready to start being normal. She wants to date and get married and have a family of her own. And she's hoping that during this chance meeting, her mum will realise how lovely Nick is and allow them to continue seeing each other.
We thought that it was time to meet up face to face. And so I came up with the idea, let's meet up at a movie theater. Let's pretend like we don't know each other and we'll bump into each other, make friends. And I thought, if he dressed nice, if he said all the right things, if he was just a kind person, that my mom would think, hey, well, why not this be the one? And then that way we don't have to lie and hide our relationship anymore.
But when Nick approaches Gypsy and her mother during the viewing of the new Cinderella remake, their well-hatched plan starts to fall apart.
She thought that he was creepy and gave off a sort of dangerous vibe. So she moved down a couple of seats and told me to follow her. I didn't.
Gypsy and Nick continue to hang out. They even manage to consummate their relationship in the cinema bathrooms before Dee Dee finds them in the lobby and marches Gypsy home, but not before slapping her across the face.
It all went wrong because I knew that Mom's never gonna let me be happy, have friends, fall in love, get married, have kids, have a normal life. And I never wanted any more than that.
With the cinema plan a flop, Gypsy and Nick start thinking of another solution, a more final plan that will allow them to be together without any barriers. If Dee Dee won't let them date, then they have no choice. They must get rid of her. They must get her out of the picture. For good. I'm Gemma Barth, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamamia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She admitted to planning and orchestrating the stabbing death of her mother Dee Dee at the hands of her boyfriend, Nick Godejohn, who was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nick remains behind bars, but in December 2023, Gypsy was released after serving 8 years of her sentence. If you're new to this case, this story is about more than just murder. It's one of the most famous cases involving the alleged diagnosis of Munchausen by proxy, known nowadays as factitious disorder imposed on another. That's when a parent either makes up fake symptoms or causes real symptoms to make it look like their child is sick. The evidence suggests Dee Dee was doing both, inflicting years of medical child abuse on her own daughter. It was so bad, Gypsy Rose saw murder as her only way out. The woman you're seeing splashed across the media now, nearly a decade later, is the picture of health. She's confident, eloquent, remorseful, and ready to start her new life as a free woman, finally. Author and journalist MJ Pack has been following and covering Gypsy Rose's story closely for years and now considers her a friend. She was even invited to the now 32-year-old's prison release party. MJ joins us now to take us all the way back to the start. MJ, let's start with Dee Dee Blanchard, Gypsy Rose's mother. Who was she? Where did she grow up and what was she all about?
Dee Dee grew up in Louisiana, and from what I have learned and been told, she was like, I don't know if character is the right way to describe her. I do believe that a lot of her manipulation was very evident even when she was young. She was given a lot of attention. She was the baby of the family. And I have been told multiple times she was not familiar with the word no. No was not a word she took kindly to. This gets overlooked a lot, but she was a beauty queen in her day. She actually competed in pageants. And so she was very used to being the center of attention. And when she was not the center of attention, it did not go over well. She also had a really contentious relationship with her family because even though she was sort of doted on and the baby, the apple of everybody's eye, I don't feel like people really liked her very much. I think that the shine wore off very quickly for her. And she got in a lot of trouble when she was younger, too. I know that she was in trouble multiple times before Gypsy was born for check fraud, for stealing credit cards, and they were usually checks and credit cards from her own family.
So how did she meet Gypsy's father and how did they go on to have Gypsy?
I believe it was just a local sort of meeting. I think that they kind of hung out in the same bar, and Rod's a good-looking guy, and I'm assuming that he was very good-looking when he was younger as well, and I think that Dee Dee kind of saw him and wanted him. Unfortunately, another thing that really gets swept under the rug with Dee Dee is that Rod was 17 years old when they met, and she was 24. If we were to reverse the genders on that, I think a lot more people would side-eye it. A lot more people would be like, why is this 24-year-old man going after a 17-year-old girl? So I do believe he was also very young and kind of naive. And we've all seen that side of Dee Dee where in her interviews from before the murder, she's very sweet seeming and just kind of warm, and you want to believe everything she says. And I think before she gained a lot of weight and sort of took on that role as the mother of a sick child, I think that she was manipulative in a much different way. So they met, and very quickly she became pregnant because she decided she wanted to lock this guy down. And Rod was a Southern guy. He was a gentleman, and he said, I got to marry her. That's what's going to have to happen. I'm going to have to marry her so we can have this baby. And he's given several interviews where he says that he woke up on his 18th birthday after Gypsy was born and just thought, I've made a huge mistake. I've got to get out of here.
So Rod decided to go his own way pretty early on in Gypsy's life. What was next for Dee Dee and Gypsy?
Don't quote me on this, but I do believe that she stayed more with her family. Dee Dee kind of went back to be with her side of the family, and they were already kind of wise to her shenanigans. But obviously, everybody loved Gypsy, and they wanted to have her around, and so they kind of put up with Dee Dee. And I think for a little bit, it seemed like maybe Dee Dee was settling down. She was a mom now. She's not going to be running around stealing credit cards and checks. And, she's got something else to focus on. And unfortunately, we saw how that ended.
What was Gypsy like as a baby? Was she, an unwell child?
I spoke with Dee Dee's cousin Bobby very, very early on, like I believe the day after everything happened. And he said that he didn't remember Gypsy being born with any sort of issues. He said that maybe she was born a little bit premature and that there might have been something with her head when she was born, not anything serious, but just something about her being premature in her skull. But otherwise, she was completely fine. There was no medical issues to speak of.
So when did she start getting, and I'm going to use air quotes here, sick? When did Dee Dee start saying that Gypsy was sick?
This just kind of blows my mind when I go back and look at it because it seems so obvious. It seems like anybody around should have been able to tell something was going on, and it just so quickly got out of hand. When Gypsy was about 8 years old, she went on a motorcycle ride with her grandpa. I believe she was wearing a helmet. I'm not sure, but I do know that they took a spill on the motorcycle. And when that happened, she was 8. I think it was summertime. It's Louisiana. It's hot. And so her leg got scraped up pretty bad. Her arm and her leg, she got a little case of road rash. And nothing serious, no broken bones, but, any concerned parent would definitely want to take her to the hospital and get her checked out because there could be a hairline fracture. You don't know. Well, when Dee Dee came back from the hospital with Gypsy, Gypsy was in a wheelchair. And Dee Dee's telling everyone, Gypsy can't walk. And they're all thinking, is it because of the accident? No, it's not because of the accident. They found something else. From there, it was just such a can of worms because I believe that she found out while she was at the hospital that she could get some form of compensation through insurance because Gypsy had been hurt. And I think that Dee Dee just took that and ran with it.
So it looks like it started around 8, but then it did snowball, as you've alluded to, into being a multitude of illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Can you list some of them or all of them? How many are we talking?
I don't know if anyone will ever know the full extent of what Dee Dee said, because I don't think Dee Dee could probably even remember every single thing she ever said that Gypsy had in passing conversation. The ones that I remember very specifically were leukemia. She claimed at the time that their website was up, Gypsy's Journey or something along those lines, Dee Dee had put up a website to describe what was happening with Gypsy. And I know that she claimed that she had a mental disability, that even though she was supposed to be 19, we all found out later at the time she was 24. And her mother was claiming that this mental disability she had the mind of like an 8 or a 10-year-old. Multiple sclerosis might have been another one. I mean, it was just a laundry list. And I think the biggest one, and this was a very important one for Dee Dee to include because it was one that garnered the most sympathy, but it was one of the ones that was the most difficult to show people. And that was leukemia. Because a lot of the other illnesses are very easy to say someone has. You're not going to question if someone has multiple sclerosis if they tell you that. Because usually there's some way that you can see. Or, I mean, it's one of those also that they call it like an invisible illness. It causes somebody a great deal of pain, but it's hard to see on the surface. Now, leukemia, people with cancer, it's very clear usually that people have cancer, especially if they're getting treatment or chemotherapy. And that was the one that I think it wasn't her undoing because she still didn't get caught until the murder. But that one was maybe almost like, I don't want to say it was fun for her, but almost like, can I get away with this? Because a lot of the illnesses, the doctors believed her. It was one of those things where you take your child into a doctor and you tell them these are the symptoms she's experiencing, and they're going to try to give you something to help with those symptoms. Obviously, leukemia, they're going to test for that. So she didn't tell the doctors that Gypsy had leukemia because Dee Dee was smart enough to know that they would test her and say, no, she does not have leukemia. But if she tells everyone, who is going to say your child does not have leukemia? Especially when she is in a wheelchair. She's so frail looking. And the biggest one was obviously the hair, which Gypsy herself told me that Dee Dee would just tell her, it's going to fall out anyway, so we have to shave it.
So for all intents and purposes, Gypsy looked sick. When you look at photos of her, she does look like a sick kid.
When I first saw the photos before I was involved in the case, because this kind of hit my radar before they had found Dee Dee, was when it came across my page. And it was because I attended school down in Springfield. I lived in Springfield, Missouri for 8 years. So when at first it was just that Gypsy was missing, that one picture that everybody has seen that circulated, that was Dee Dee with her arm around Gypsy in the wheelchair, and Gypsy's wearing that little white hat and holding a small dog. When I kept seeing that photo, I thought that Gypsy was an elderly woman.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I thought that she was a woman possibly in her 60s or 70s, just kind of glancing at it, and didn't realize until later it was a woman, a young woman. But yes, Gypsy definitely looked ill. And a lot of that was because, and this is just one of the parts that turns my stomach when I start thinking about it, is the medicines that Dee Dee was giving her, and I have seen the crime scene photos, there was a closet that was like floor to ceiling crammed full of medication.
What kind?
Anything you could possibly think of. Some of them were prescription drugs. Some of them were vitamins. Most of them were prescription drugs. I don't know if it's been discussed how Dee Dee was able to get a hold of these. I believe some of them she was able to obtain legally. Some of them I don't believe she obtained legally. But they weren't just to prove, look how sick my child is. They were also to show, okay, I need you to feel this way today. So Dee Dee sort of figured out, this is the cocktail that I can give her today that will make her nauseous, that will make her sleepy, that will make her subdued. That was a big portion of it, was making it to where Gypsy was easily manipulated. And not just mentally, but physically. So she could just pick her up and put her somewhere if she needed to.
I know that you're saying that she didn't tell the doctors that Gypsy had leukemia, but she was going to hospitals and doctors and getting Gypsy checked. She was getting multiple surgeries done on Gypsy. So things like getting glands removed so she didn't drool, eye surgeries, ear surgeries, biopsies. How on earth do you get all of those done unnecessarily?
Well, when it came to the ear surgeries, I do believe that that might have been one of the few that were more understandable, because I think one of the things that Gypsy did have as a child that wouldn't classify her as a sick child, but she was a child who had some ear issues. Now, if you talk to a lot of people, you'll come across many, many people who said, oh, I had tons of ear infections when I was a kid. And it's just a fairly common thing in some children. And so that's one of the few that I think that it might have almost been like, oh, that one was easy because that was real. Which is so horrible. I know. It's just a terrible thing to think about. But I do believe that there was some sort of corruption happening somewhere. That's just a personal theory, only because the doctor that they saw while they lived in Louisiana pre-Katrina somehow miraculously ended up in Springfield post-Katrina, just like they did. And it could be a coincidence. It could not. No one has ever been charged. I'm not saying for a fact that that's something that happened, but I do believe that her charisma and her manipulation only got her so far. I think at some point money was exchanging hands, because she did have a decent source of money coming in because of Gypsy's illnesses.
We've talked about how Dee Dee likes attention, and once she had Gypsy, a sick kid, that kind of ramped up again. Just how much attention was she gaining, or the pair of them gaining? Because they were doing things like Disney trips and Make-A-Wish and that kind of stuff, weren't they?
Well, and it started before they moved to Missouri, too. There was some sort of award that Gypsy was given when she was younger that was sort of like a, Child of the Year sort of thing, where they honor children who are really sick and who they consider to be like, beacons of hope in society. And I also know that, Dee Dee would take her to, I don't want to call it a pageant, but I'm sure that Dee Dee probably saw it that way. The one where she was having Gypsy sing on stage. But the attention really ramped up once they got to Springfield. And for that, oh gosh, for Dee Dee, that was just the jackpot. First of all, she has this sick child. And then anyone who she talks to, she says, oh, her dad left us high and dry, which we all know is not true. Rod did not want to be with Dee Dee. He wanted to be Gypsy's father, and he wanted to be a present father, but he just didn't want to be Dee Dee's husband anymore. That's not what Dee Dee would tell people, so it didn't matter. But she's now a single mother of a very sick child who has been displaced by Hurricane Katrina. She hears about Springfield, Missouri, which there were a lot of places, obviously, in the country at the time that were donating or helping. And I had just started my freshman year at Missouri State University that summer when Katrina hit. And I remember very clearly that it was all over campus. We were clearing out dorms and doubling up our dorms so that we could have housing for students. We could have housing for people who had been displaced and families. There were food drives. I mean, Springfield really rallied around the victims of Hurricane Katrina. So Dee Dee shows up, and not only is this community kind of welcoming her with open arms, she's already got her sob story with her single mom and her sick child. Now her entire house is destroyed. But the biggest thing for her was, oops, all of our medical history is gone. Everything that we had, all of our records, it got washed away. And their house really was destroyed. Where they had been living in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina actually was destroyed. It was a very dangerous situation. But now she had to do an oral history, which meant as Gypsy's mother, she had to go to the doctor and say, we don't have any records anymore, but this is what she has. So a lot of the illnesses that we previously discussed, it was just taken at her word. But to answer your original question was once they were there, they were gifted a Habitat for Humanity house, which was specialty built for Gypsy. We're all aware of the little pink house on Volunteer Way.
This team spent the afternoon moving boxes and furniture into this Aurora house. And it's all for this family, Dee Dee Blanchard and her 12-year-old daughter, Gypsy Rose.
It's been a blessing. People have been so nice to us. It feels like we finally came home.
It is wonderful. It's so beautiful and happy and homey.
A home that this family was desperately in need of.
I know that they were given a car. I think it was a Kia. And it was, again, specially built for Gypsy to manage her wheelchair. All the radio stations in Springfield were very familiar with Dee Dee and Gypsy because they liked to hook them up with tickets for shows. There was a Miranda Lambert concert, at least one, if not multiple, where Gypsy met Miranda Lambert, was allowed to go backstage. As you mentioned, the trips for Disney. I mean, these were almost like Make-A-Wish trips for dying children. And this was a big source of anger from the community, too, was all of these things that had been, I don't want to say handed to them, but given to them out of the giving nature of Springfield at the time. And when everything was uncovered and everyone kind of assumed at first that Gypsy was going along with it, they were furious. Everyone felt just like they had been so taken advantage of without getting all the information right away.
I want to focus a little bit more on Gypsy. You've said that she was going on these trips, which are supposed to be for dying kids. So did she think she was dying?
I don't know if she thought that she was dying or not. That would be a question for her. I think that she just, and again, for how long, we're not sure, but she knew because her mother told her she was very sick. And I don't know if that topic of death was breached or not, but something that a lot of people overlook too is that in cases of Munchausen by proxy, there is a decently high mortality rate because unfortunately, you can only go so far with a sick child when it comes to the attention and the material items that are gifted to you. It only goes so far because either your child gets better or they don't. If you're looking at it from Dee Dee's point of view, the only way that you can top the mother of a sick child is the mother of a dead child. And she wouldn't have been able to fake that. So I do believe that at a certain point, it was going to be her or Gypsy. Because I don't see, how do you release somebody that you've kept prisoner for this long, lied to everyone else? You don't just at some point go, okay, well, you can go live a normal life now, but don't tell anybody. Like, that's just not realistic.
Which is where the tension started to grow. But if we rewind back to when Gypsy was a child and she was very reliant on her mother and, you know, young 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, they want to be around their mums. It kind of changes when you get to 13, 14, 15.
True.
But did they have a good relationship when she was younger? Did she love her mum and enjoy spending time with her as a kid that we know?
I think that she did. And she still, to this day, she says she loves her mother. She wishes that it didn't have to happen the way that it did. But from what I know, I think that was one of the reasons it became so successful was because I do believe she trusted her mother wholeheartedly. What child wouldn't? I mean, your mother is supposed to be, out of everyone in the entire world, the person who you trust the most. At least, like you said, when you're a child. And so even though there were situations that had been told to me by, again, Bobby, the cousin, he said that there were a couple of times when Gypsy had first gotten her wheelchair that she'd wait until Dee Dee left the room and then she would start pushing her other cousins around in the wheelchair and running around. Or I think he said there was one time somebody got a new trampoline and she was sitting in her wheelchair watching everybody jump up and down and she waited until Dee Dee left. And then she did what any other 8-year-old would do is she ran over and started jumping on the trampoline. when Dee Dee came out from the house, as soon as Gypsy saw her, she kind of collapsed like she couldn't walk and pulled herself back to her wheelchair. And that, I think, is where a lot of people take issue, is because they're like, well, so she knew she could walk. Well, yes, but how could she trust herself when her mother's telling her you can't walk, or you won't be able to walk for much longer, so you need to get used to this wheelchair?
I think it's very hard to put yourself in Gypsy's head in that instance, to try and understand what it would be like to have someone every single day telling you you are so sick, you've got all of these things, but then you personally are like, but I can move my feet, or but I can take a bite, I can eat, I don't need a feeding tube. It must have been so confusing as a kid.
Oh, I'm sure it was extremely confusing. I mean, you see all of these armchair psychologists now who have opinions on her, especially on Instagram, where they say, well, why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do that? Her dad loved her. Why didn't she go to her dad? She was told her dad wanted nothing to do with her. Any kind of communication that was sent by him was immediately intercepted by Dee Dee. And so if you go that long in your life and you've heard nothing from your dad and you're like, wow, I'm sick and my dad doesn't even send me a birthday card, what are you supposed to think about him? You can't trust him either. So I do believe so much of it was built on Dee Dee's lies and manipulation. We've been able to see firsthand how manipulative she was. Those interviews with the Springfield local news stations before the murder are just, they're chilling, because you would think if you watch those with no context, you had no idea who Dee Dee and Gypsy were. You would think, wow, what a strong lady. What a strong kid. Like, they're so lucky to have each other. She's so lucky to have a mom who's so warm and caring. And then you watch it now and it makes me sick, honestly.
Just how isolated was Gypsy? Did she have friends? Was she allowed to go out when she got older?
Oh, no.
What did coming into teenagehood look like for Gypsy?
I mean, she was not allowed to attend school. That was another thing that I don't know. I mean, the system failed her in every way possible. And one of those things was that she never was able to get an education. I mean, I believe it was probably something Dee Dee was doing where she filled out the paperwork that said, I will homeschool her or whatever, and then just didn't do it. But her interaction with people was not only very limited, what there was very heavily monitored by Dee Dee. So she did have a friend in her neighborhood. Her name was Aaliyah. And Aaliyah would come over and she would do things like bring them holiday meals, like, leftovers from Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, since they didn't have big meals because they didn't have any family in the area. And she would help out around the house. And she was unknowingly closer to age in Gypsy than she realized. She always thought that she was 5 to 6 years older than Gypsy, and found out that Gypsy was like a year older than her when all this came out. But I know that Dee Dee did not allow Gypsy to be alone very often. There were things that she was able to do somewhat socially, like the sci-fi conventions that Gypsy went to with her mother, obviously the trips, but Gypsy always had Dee Dee right there by her side. And so it was like, again, just to go back to the interviews, if you look at one of them, Dee Dee has Gypsy by the arm while she's talking, and you can almost tell while Gypsy's talking, like the hand on her arm is just like, don't you dare. Don't mess this up. And then like when Gypsy stopped talking, Dee Dee would kind of let up a little bit and then be like, okay, we can move on. But again, I mean, the trips, Dee Dee was just always there. And the only time that Gypsy ever had any time completely to herself was when her mother would take her sleeping pills at night. When Dee Dee went to sleep, that was when she was able to be herself, as we've seen from the pictures and the conversations with Nick.
How did Gypsy start to assert her independence? You've mentioned that she started to talk to people online. Was that where she started to live her life, really, as a teenager?
Absolutely. I think back to when I discovered the internet back in the late 1900s. And I mean, it opens up a whole world of people that you can speak to. And so not only that, but she could either be authentically herself, or she could be a new personality that she made up. She was no longer confined to being the sick girl or, Dee Dee's daughter. She was able to be who she wanted to be. And I think that the thrill of that authenticity must have been just amazing. But there were some smaller instances where she was able to connect with people more locally. again, the sci-fi convention. That was something that was brought to my attention when I was covering the case kind of in real time.
What was Dee Dee's response to Gypsy asserting more independence? We know she was medically and emotionally abusing Gypsy, but did it become more physical as time went on?
It definitely became more physical. I know that there was an instance where she was chained to the bed for a week.
Once she got me inside the house, she chained me to the bed. She smashed my computer and my cell phone. And I was chained for 2 weeks.
What did she use to bind you to the bed?
Handcuffs and a dog leash. The dog leash was connected to her. So anytime that I would move, she would feel me move. And if she was asleep, I would move, she would wake up.
It was very scary. And again, a lot of the armchair psychologists would like to say, why didn't she just leave? She was able to walk. Her mom went to sleep at night. Why didn't she just get up and walk out? Well, and the question also comes back to, well, I'm sure we'll get to this eventually, but why didn't her and Nick just leave that night? Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just leave? And Dee Dee was such a manipulative and honestly like powerful force. I don't think that she would have ever been able to leave with Dee Dee alive. Dee Dee would have figured something out. She would have tracked her, definitely would have tracked her down. That wouldn't have been hard for her, I'm sure. And then the threat of what would happen if she got returned when she went, I mean, she went on a date with a guy. She wasn't even trying to leave her mom's house. She just wanted to go on a date with a guy, and her mother chained her to the bed for a week. So what's going to happen if any of these escape attempts are unsuccessful?
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Gemma Barth. I'm speaking with journalist and author MJ Pack about the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. Up next, we dive into what happened when Gypsy met Nick and how they concocted their plan to eliminate Dee Dee. Let's talk about Nick. We've mentioned his name a few times and he is a big part of this story. How did Gypsy meet Nick?
Gypsy met Nick on christiansingles.com, which never fails to get a chuckle out of me. I mean, she was still looking for a man with good Christian morals. And I make a joke of that. But the thing is that she was not looking at this as, I'm going to find a man to murder my mother. She was doing what any woman her age does normally, which is online dating. She wanted to find a boyfriend. I found my own boyfriend on an online dating site. Like,
so did I.
Yeah. It's like, that's not that unheard of. And it's not like she didn't go to a site that was like, even, you know, with a specific kink or something that would be considered darker or more nefarious. Like she was looking for a boyfriend.
And what was Nick like and what was their relationship like?
Nick was, by all accounts, very shy and withdrawn. He was a quiet boy. He's autistic. I know he'd been in some trouble with some social awkwardness involved. I don't know if Gypsy was aware of this or not when they first started dating. Probably not, because I don't think this is like a line I would open with on like a first date. But Nick was actually arrested for watching pornography in a McDonald's, allegedly masturbating. They kind of said he had his hands in his pants. And I think that he had been at that McDonald's for hours before somebody finally called the police. But again, like, he wasn't doing it to victimize anyone there. It was more like he probably thought no one would notice, and somebody noticed. So definitely a socially awkward guy.
But to Gypsy, he was very loving. He was quite romantic.
I think he was. It seems very strange to describe him as gentle, but he was a romantic. I think that he had this whole idea of a girl who finally liked him, and a girl who was willing to sort of play into some of his darker fantasies online. And not only that, but when it came to light that she was being abused. And this is just a personal look at the situation. I think that, first of all, he has said he was very angry, because who wouldn't be angry to find out that the person you love is being abused? But I think that it was also somewhat romantic that he was going to swoop in and save her. he was going to be her knight in shining armor. And I think that idea appealed to him very much.
Do we know when this plan to get rid of Dee Dee actually started? Was it something that sparked it?
I know that they had been dating for a total of 2 years before the murder happened. Like this was not a overnight thing. This definitely simmered for quite a while. There were 3 separate plans that people rarely talk about. It was not just, we're going to kill Dee Dee. There was plan A, plan B, and plan C. Now, plan A was that he would meet her mother and he would be introduced as Gypsy's boyfriend and they would live happily ever after. That was what they attempted to do at the movie theater. Now, obviously, that did not go as planned because he didn't even really meet Dee Dee. I think that they tried to, but again, that social awkwardness was just kind of like she could tell something was going on. And I don't think she had any idea that Gypsy knew this guy. But there was a guy sort of sniffing around her daughter, and she immediately sort of had her guard up. And so I think that right away they were like, this isn't going to work. Like this, like we tried, but this will not work. Plan B was also enacted in the same breath because plan B was going to be if she could get pregnant, then there was no way that Dee Dee could keep Nick out of Gypsy's life. Because the father of her child has to be there. Obviously, that's not true for Dee Dee because she had no problem getting rid of Rod. But in their mind, you know, they're going to start a family. And so that was one of the reasons for the consummation of their relationship in the movie theater bathroom, was because if Gypsy can get pregnant, then we've got an out. Again, when this gets overlooked and everyone's just like, they just killed her. They should have done this and they should have done that. And it's just like, it was not just, okay, we're going to kill this woman. Like, that's the only way we can do it. Like, they did try, admittedly, not so great ideas first, but they did not go straight to murder.
And just for those that are new to the movie theatre plan, they lived in separate states, right? So Nick had to travel to this movie theatre. Like, it was all planned. It was all orchestrated by them.
It's bizarre to think about because, yes, he took a Greyhound bus from Wisconsin all the way to Missouri, and he dressed up to match her. It was like they were going to prom. Like, if you've seen the pictures, he's wearing like this sort of like pale powder blue, like vest and tie. And it's to match her replica Cinderella dress because they were seeing the live action Cinderella movie. Again, if you see the pictures with no context, you'd be like, "Aw." But yeah, I mean, it was meant to be like, I'm showing up dressed nicely to meet your mother because I want to tell her my intentions. And Dee Dee was just kind of like, who is this weirdo? Get away from us. So that plan, as well-meaning as it was, just fell flat.
So when did they decide on a plan C?
I believe it was after Nick had returned to Wisconsin. So plan A is out the window. Plan A is gone. Dee Dee's never going to like this guy. Plan B is who knows when they're going to get a chance for that again. And obviously, Gypsy did not get pregnant, not only because, you know, just one time, what are the odds? I mean, but also all of the medication she was on, her poor nutrition. I don't think that her body could have sustained a pregnancy at the time. But it's not like they have all these opportunities to hook up in the bathroom at the movie theater. So I think that after that, they were like, well, plan C is our only option.
Did they plan it online? And what was the plan?
The plan was, because the only time that they were able to talk was when Dee Dee took her sleeping pills at night. And Gypsy knew that the only way she was able to comfortably engage in all of her online escapades was when her mother was asleep because she slept very heavily. In their mind, that's the only time where she's not watching is when she's asleep. And we have to do it at night and we have to go. And it was fairly well thought out. They knew to take cash out of the safe that Dee Dee had. Gypsy was also able to take, I believe, some of her, I don't know if it was her Xanax or her mother's Xanax, because I believe they were both on Xanax. So she made sure she took some of those when she left. She was ready to go once Nick showed up. And it went according to plan.
Can you walk us through what happened to Dee Dee in June 2015?
That evening, Dee Dee took her medication and went to bed. I believe she was face down, sleeping on her stomach when this happened. Nick and Gypsy had been texting back and forth as he was on the bus on the way there. He took a cab from the Greyhound station to Gypsy's house, and she met him at the door, and he asked her if she had all of the supplies ready. So I believe it was gloves, the knife. I don't remember if there was anything else, any other accessories, but the gloves and the knife, I believe he told her to leave by the door. And she made it very clear she wanted nothing to do with it. She just wanted to get it done, and he would handle it for her. And he assured her, I've read the pages and pages and pages of text messages. Like, he made sure that she knew that he had it under control. He was going to be able to do it. Don't you worry about it. And so she hid in the bathroom while Nick moved into Dee Dee's room and stabbed her, I believe, 17 times. Dee Dee did wake up during. That is another thing that I think should be taken into consideration, is that a lot of people say that the 17 times, that's excessive. That's almost like a frenzy. But at the same time, Dee Dee was a big lady, and Nick had never killed anyone before. How do you know if you're hitting a major artery? How do you know if you're hitting a vital organ? Like, it was not precise in any way. The only thing that really starts to concern me about whether he was taking pleasure in this or not was that they said that the cuts on the back of her neck were so deep she was nearly decapitated.
Oh.
So it was brutal. And he's the only one who can speak to this, but in my mind, the way I can see it playing out is, again, just trying to go for anything you can, because once you start, you can't stop. Like, this is something you have to see through to the end. But he did claim to have some darker fantasies, some darker things that he never thought he would be able to do. And I think that at a certain point, he probably did enjoy it, whether it was because it was these dark, intrusive thoughts he'd never been able to act on, or just, again, that knight in shining armor sort of idea that I'm doing this for the woman I love. How dare you do this to her? Like, you deserve this. Again, Nick's the only one who can really speak to how he felt in that moment.
So after he murdered Dee Dee, did they leave immediately? What were their next steps?
I do believe that they cleaned up. They cleaned up quite a bit of the blood. Gypsy brought him the cleaning supplies. Doubt they were able to get all of it just because there was so much of it. The crime scene photos are just absolutely brutal. They basically cleaned up what they felt would be anything identifiable. So footprints, fingerprints, anything like that. They didn't touch Dee Dee. I believe that they kind of just shut the door to Dee Dee's room, and that was that. The one detail that always sticks out to me is it was June in Springfield, Missouri when this happened. Mid-June. And it gets so humid, so hot there. Like, I mean, I live up in St. Louis now, but gosh, the Springfield summers are just so intense. Ugh, it's just sweaty and gross. And Gypsy made sure that she turned down all of the air conditioning in the house as far as it could go so it could stay cold in the house, because she didn't like the idea of her mother's body rotting and smelling in that heat. She wanted to almost preserve her so that there was some semblance, I guess, of dignity when someone found her, because she knew someone was going to find her.
That's very premeditated, isn't it?
It's after the fact, but I think it is clear-headed.
So how was Dee Dee found?
Dee Dee was found because, again, and this is where it comes back to people who think that Gypsy's just this cold-blooded killer who delighted in murdering her mother and blah, 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 blah. I don't know how long it would have taken them to find her if it hadn't been for the Facebook post. And the Facebook post is how I was alerted to the case, because it was the shared account of Dee Dee and Gypsy, and all it said was, "That bitch is dead." And it was made, I believe, almost 2 days after Dee Dee had actually been murdered. And I think that what happened was Gypsy, who we eventually found, was the one who made the Facebook post. was just sitting around going, okay, we're going to hear something at some point. Somebody's going to say something. We're going to hear it on the news. Someone's going to find my mom. And 2 days went by and nothing. And I think that she started to, instead of feeling like, yeah, we got away with it, it was more like, when are they going to find my mom? Like, she did not like the idea of her just rotting alone in that house, which really, I think, says something about her character. Because if she really was this cold-blooded monster who only cared about her freedom, which when people say that too, when they're like, all she cared about was being free, it's like, yeah. At a certain point, you have to stop caring about your mother because you are a literal prisoner. But she really did care about the dignity and what happened to her mom. And that's the only reason that they even found out that it was Nick and Gypsy, was because of that Facebook post. They were able to trace it back to Nick's house in Wisconsin because they had already been there comfortably for a few days.
That did take a while though, didn't it? Because they get this Facebook post. Authorities are alerted. They eventually find Dee Dee's body.
Well, and it even took a while for the authorities to be alerted because so many people were like, is this a joke? Have you been hacked? Like, I mean, it went back and forth on that post where they weren't even sure, do we call the police? What do we do?
But then when police rock up, they find Dee Dee's body and you've got no Gypsy. You've got all of her wheelchairs still in the house. Do you remember all of that playing out in the media headlines?
Yes. I began covering the case when I found out about the Facebook post and Gypsy was still missing. So my thought was what a lot of other people thought. Oh my God, some monster has murdered this nice lady and kidnapped her daughter, because there was a follow-up on that Facebook post as well about sexually assaulting Gypsy in particular. And it was posted by Gypsy, but I believe it was also her trying to get some sense of urgency in there, like, go over to the house already. This is not a joke. Come on. So when I started covering the case, I was under the impression that it was a missing persons case. This was a murder, and we were trying to find this sweet, disabled, sick child, and not just disabled, but also mentally disabled, might not even know where she is or like why this happened. I mean, it was a real sense of urgency in that community. And then they had the press conference. Greene County Sheriff came out and gave the press conference, and I believe the line is something along the lines of nothing is as it seems. It seemed very mysterious as soon as he started talking, and I was like, hold up. I have a feeling this is about to take a whole turn. And obviously it did. But basically, the Greene County Sheriff informed everyone that Dee Dee had been murdered and Gypsy was not missing. Gypsy had been found. And he kind of just like unleashed it, like he dropped it all on us like a pound of bricks, where it was just like, Gypsy's not missing. Gypsy's been found. She's with her boyfriend in Wisconsin, and we've charged them both with the murder of her mother. And I was like, oh, I'm still stuck on found in Wisconsin with boyfriend. Like,
yeah,
so many things rapid fire back to back that I was just stunned. And I know everyone else was too. And that's really when it started taking off. And I remember seeing her walk into court. Everyone was just, what? Like, no glasses. Like, I mean, it was just bonkers. It really was.
Have you spoken to the family members and friends, people that knew Dee Dee and Gypsy, about that moment, about seeing Gypsy walking in her orange overalls, walking into a court, for one, and she doesn't look sick?
Not only does she not look sick, she doesn't even look particularly scared. She looks almost confident, and I can't blame her. I mean, she's finally gotten this taste of freedom. I'm actually fairly close with her stepmother, Christy. We've been friends since this case just because of my coverage of it. We connected on Facebook and then, just became friends. I make friends in really strange places. She's great. But I do remember that there were tears. because, I mean, obviously the gravity of the situation. And as a parent, I don't think that you would want to see your child walking for the first time in years, walking into a courtroom in the orange jumpsuit.
Did Nick and Gypsy admit to everything right away?
I know that the interrogation lasted quite a long time. I think that Nick broke a lot quicker than Gypsy did. I think that they both kind of had these little stories, and Gypsy learned a lot from her mother. I think that's one of the reasons that people are cautious of her now. And she has said before that she picked up some things from her mom, but I think that that self-awareness is really important to say that, like, yeah, I learned a lot about being manipulative from my mom. That makes her, I think, less likely to use it on other people. But at a certain point, it is something that's kind of inherited and something that's kind of ingrained. And I think if she keeps an eye on it, I think she'll be fine. But I do know that that interrogation, you could see Dee Dee coming out in her a little bit, where she was just deny.
Why did this happen?
I don't know.
You do know why it happened. Okay.
I don't know why it happened.
Let me tell you something. I walk out that door.
Did she have a heart attack? She was
Hey,
sick.
it could be. We're not going to play those games. I'm not going to do that.
Nick, when they asked him, like I said, he broke, and it wasn't really a break like he was upset. It was almost more like, yeah, I killed her. Like, okay, we're not going to get away with it. Like, yeah, I did. But I think that he thought that they were going to take it easy on him, because who wouldn't, hearing this story? Like, you don't understand what she was doing to my girlfriend. Like, I had to.
Okay, I'll admit it. I did actually stab her mom. I will admit it.
I know. Okay.
The only reason I did it is because I did it for me and her. That's the real reason I did it. I would have never did it if it was not for me and her.
Okay.
There's no way I would have did it for anyone else.
Okay, so you just
I
did.
truly do worship her to the point there's nothing I want to do for her.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think you've proved that, right?
Yes.
The one thing that kills me is if you ask Gypsy and Nick the same question about, would you go back and do it again? She says no. I wish that there was anything else we could have done. I wish that at the very least, when he showed up that night, we just left. She's told me that personally, that I wish to God that we had just turned around and walked away. And when you ask him, he says, oh, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. He does not have any remorse. And to a certain extent, I understand, because again, that's protecting the person that you love, and you feel like you've done this really noble thing. But there's been time now to sit on it and think about it and reflect and wonder, could I have done something differently? What if we had left that night and gone to the police? Because now she has someone with her, someone who can sort of vouch for her. What if they had even just gone across the street to the neighbors? There's so many different things. And he just comes back to, oh, no, yeah, I did it and I do it again.
We know that Gypsy knew she could walk, but during this court process and detectives and investigators looking into her life and her mum's life, was she finding out as they were finding out that she wasn't sick, that she didn't have all of these issues? Was all of that unfolding for her in real time as well?
That I'm not entirely sure on. I do believe that there were certain things that she was aware of not being true. But like I said, the laundry list was so long. There might have been things that Dee Dee said that she didn't even know Dee Dee said she had. Like, oh, my mom said I had this. That's a new one. Like, I just think that there was so many lies on top of lies on top of lies that it was hard for even Dee Dee to keep straight. So I wouldn't expect Gypsy to. When I was asking her opinion on a story that had been told to me, I remember Gypsy said, oh yeah, my mom was talking and I just zoned out. Because, I mean, she'd heard it all before, and mom starts talking and then, okay, let's just think about something else because here she goes. So there probably was a lot that was said either behind her back or in front of her face. And Gypsy was just like, more white noise.
What about the diagnosis of Munchausen's by proxy? When did that start being brought up?
That actually, I don't know if it was brought up. To me, it's pretty cut and dry that it's Munchausen by proxy. I know that as the court proceedings went along, that would have been brought up. But when I was covering the case, my first step in that direction, because I'm familiar with a lot of different psychological disorders, and I'm a writer, so a lot of those things are kind of things that I've either studied or encountered. And I looked into it because I think the first thing that stuck out in my mind was recalling the little girl in The Sixth Sense, played by Misha Barton. Remember how that ended, whose mother killed her because of the Munchausen by proxy. And my first thought was that sounds like that's what it is. And so I looked it up and I actually contacted the leading doctor on that particular disorder. And right away he was like, oh yes. Not only that, but he also had a theory that it wasn't simply Munchausen by proxy. It was also malingering by proxy. So Munchausen by proxy is actually like an umbrella term because what Dee Dee experienced was technically Munchausen by proxy and malingering by proxy. Now, Munchausen by proxy is specifically making your child sick to gain attention and sympathy. So that kind of non-tangible thing, like the people who are saying, oh, poor you. Malingering by proxy is for material goods. And so that's the Habitat for Humanity house, the car, the trips. So those are actually two different things because the motive of this disorder is usually pretty important. And it usually goes one way or the other because it's kind of hard to get both without attracting someone's attention who is going to look into your case and find out that you're lying. But in this case, Dee Dee was able to get away with it all. So she kind of swung back and forth between the Munchausen and malingering, depending on what she needed at the moment. Did she want people to feel sorry for her? Did she want to be on TV that day? Did she want some extra cash? Did she want to go on a trip? Like, depending on what her goal was at the time was which way her disorder swang.
Back to Gypsy, and both Gypsy and Nick went to prison. They were sentenced and convicted for murdering Dee Dee. And the reason we're talking about it again now is because Gypsy has just been released. She has served her time. She is now a free woman. And she is everywhere. She is on every major publication in America, it feels. She's on podcasts. She's on TV. She's got a new documentary. She's got a new book. What do you see in her as a newly free woman who has now served her time?
Well, I don't think any of us, least of all her, expected this kind of response. I think we all thought it was going to be, a news item, but I don't think anyone could have expected this. But her as a newly free woman, I was lucky enough to be at her release party and see her the day that she got out. And everyone's seen this new glammed up version of her because that's, that's what the media wants us to see. And that's great too, because this is something that she didn't get to experience. She's finally getting all these things that she didn't get to have before. A house of her own, a husband, a new wardrobe, honestly. Like, all those things might seem like small things to everyone else, but for her, that's the only kind of thing she wanted was a normal life. And she is incredibly grounded and sweet. And everyone's sort of familiar with how her parole officer made her leave back to Louisiana early. She was supposed to have all these plans in Kansas City that weekend. She got very upset, obviously, but she was not upset because she wasn't going to get to go to the Chiefs game or she wasn't going to get to meet Taylor Swift. Her first thing that she said when her parole officer called, because I was there, was, everyone came all this way to see me and I have to leave. Like, I had driven up 4 hours. She had people who had driven up all the way from Louisiana. And that's not a short drive. And her immediate thought was not, I don't get to do all the stuff I want. I'm already getting in trouble or I'm already having my freedom restricted, which, to be honest, that's probably what I would have thought. I would have been like, are you serious? Am I back in prison already? And her first thought was about how other people were going to be put out because of her. And I just think that's really impressive. I think that speaks a lot to her character.
I think I've been blown away by how eloquent she is, how normal she is.
Mm-hmm.
Prison didn't break her? What was her experience like there?
She told me that prison was actually the best experience she'd had since living with her mother. She said that she'd never felt freer than being in prison. And what a sentence. No, she's always been very honest about it. And I don't think that she deserved as much time as she got or that it necessarily needed to be prison, but she definitely needed some sort of transitionary period. She couldn't simply go from the way she was living with her mother and then just be like, oh, you're a woman in the world now. Good luck. Like, I don't think that would have gone very well. And so I think prison sort of gave her a structure. It taught her how to interact with other people and gave her certain life skills and gave her time to figure out the kind of person that she wanted to be, sort of in a safe space. I don't know if that's been the same experience for Nick, but I do think that for her, there needed to be some sort of period of time between how she lived with her mother and going into a normal life to help her transition smoothly. Otherwise, it would have just been like teaching a baby deer to walk and you're going to drop it out of a plane. Like, good luck.
You mentioned she has a husband who is not Nick, we should say. She met someone in prison. They were writing letters to each other. She and Nick split, a year into their prison sentence. What's happening to him? Does he remain in prison for a few more years, or what's his situation?
Oh, Nick has life in prison, no possibility of parole. I mean, he got the harshest sentence. I do see where people take issue with that, where she basically got the lightest sentence possible and he got the harshest. I know that a lot of what was taken into account, obviously, was the abuse that she suffered at the hands of her mother, and that he did what he did willingly and seems to have no remorse. I don't know. The justice system is very, very fickle, and it does seem to play favorites sometimes. But given what I know, I don't know that his sentence was necessarily unfair.
Lastly, MJ, Gypsy killed her mum because she wanted freedom, a normal life, love. She was both a perpetrator and a victim. We can't get away from the fact that she did murder her mother or help murder her mother, but she was also a victim of her mother's abuse. How do we accept both of those sides of her?
That's a great question, and that's one that I've never been asked before, but oddly enough, I have an answer for it. I think everyone needs to, first of all, stop with the black and white. It is not a black and white situation. It is so many shades of gray in between. People really like things to be black and white, right and wrong. I know that this is not one of those situations. But I think that what would help people accept this is to put yourself in her situation. Imagine that was your life that you were going through. And everyone wants to say, she could have done this, she could have done that. What the human mind does to protect itself from what is going on is just incredible. And so for her to be in that situation and think that this was the only way out and still love her mother should tell you something about how horrific it was. And even if you're going to go from Nick's point of view, how would you react to find out that the person that you think you love more than anything is literally being tortured by the person they're supposed to trust? It's just, people are so quick to say, I would have done this, I would have done that. But I think if you really sit down with the idea and really try to put yourself in either of their shoes, I think that is what is going to lead to acceptance for the people who are on the fence about Gypsy, at least for Gypsy, because it was just a situation that absolutely never should have happened. The system failed her. Her mother failed her. And at a certain point, when somebody is backed into a corner, they're going to come out fighting. And to say that you wouldn't until you're in that situation, I don't think is fair at all.
Thanks to MJ for joining us on today's episode. If you've enjoyed listening, the best way to support us so we can continue to create these episodes every week is to leave us a rating or review in your favourite podcast app. True Crime Conversations is a Mamamia podcast hosted by me, Gemma Barth, with audio design by Scott Stronach. Our executive producer is Moylan. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.